Welcome to the Cheat Code Corner podcast, season 2, sales edition, where we hit you with the cheat codes to help you advance in the areas that you care about. In this season, we will be interviewing master sellers and negotiators and key account directors. These are all people that have brought on tens of millions of dollars across their careers. These people know how to pitch. They're very persuasive. They're very charming. They're authentic. And the idea is we're going to be able to better understand what it takes to become a successful salesperson, how to do positioning, but more importantly, how to build these strong and deep client relationships. A lot of the information that they share, you'll be able to incorporate into your own day-to-day world, and hopefully that'll be able to help you win. All right, well, hopefully you enjoy the season.
I ended up going to some business club meetings in college, and I was like, oh, well, what is this business thing? This is something I wish I would have known about. You have a new role, but then you also have to learn the new, language. And I think that's one of the things that's Salesforce has been doing a good job around figure out what's your character, do you have competencies, that they're looking for.
Now today, I'm interviewing a really, really dope guest. This guy has an amazing background. I loved his story. I learned an incredible amount from him. But I got to tell you, like this cat works hard. He grinds. He kills it. He's consistent. And I really, really appreciated his unique approach to sales. I learned a ton, and so hopefully you will too. I am pleased to introduce Javier Arevalo to the stage. What made you say, yeah, you know what, I'm going to join the Cheat Code Corner podcast?
Yeah, I would say you and I have talked about this. We have similar mindsets, the focus, but also the goal of the podcast, right? Even for context, I grew up in El Salvador, and my parents they went to college, but they went to college in El Salvador. So, for example, going to college here was something I had to figure out myself. And I love my parents. They gave me fantastic support, and I feel fortunate, especially growing up with parents that were teachers, and they still are teachers here now.
All right.
The fact that your podcast it's about educating others and maybe folks that may not have access to. So that was really the why. The focus of your podcast is the reason why I'm wanting to show up.
Gotcha.
And going.
That's good. It's not, and I appreciate that, man. Because at the end of the day, to your point as well, it's education, is trying to help folks that maybe don't have access to the game or the resources or what have you. And you've had a lot of success already where you're at. And once we started kind of connecting, I was just this guy, he's on it. He's advancing, and we need to be able to extract the stuff that he knows to other people that, whether they're entering their careers, maybe they're mid-career, or even just, they're trying to get a little bit of a boost. So I really appreciate you joining, bro, for real.
Yeah, man. And, I appreciate the kind of words, but in general, the way I go about my life in general is how do you give back, right? Someone believed in me way back when. I honestly feel fortunate, but believed in me throughout my entire life, whether that was coming to a new country and a teacher was hey, maybe you should, skip the English language program, put you in radar class. That was a boost. And getting into college, to careers, the first job in sales.
Yeah.
And, it's all about giving back, just send the elevator back down in the way.
With this episode, we're interviewing, master salespeople, people, new biz sales, people that are doing very well, in this space. And so I would love to know, and I always ask, I've been asking a lot of these folks, because how did you exactly get into sales, specifically new business sales?
Oh, I grew up, and when I was 5 years old, I said, "Hey, Mom, I want to be an account executive." So
yeah, I know. Same thing. Same thing. It's the same thing.
So I kind of happened to fall into it, and it was honestly one of the best things that could have happened. And there's one aspect, I would say, there's tough times in life, and there are pivotal moments in life that open your eyes and give you certain, I would say, you go through a certain struggle, and then you overcome that. There's something at the end of the tunnel. And for me, that was my career. So funny enough, growing up, I wanted to be a doctor. And that's because I grew up in Latin America. I feel there's 4 fields of education or career you got. It's either you're a teacher, you're a doctor, engineer, or lawyer. And my parents were teachers, and my dad was a lawyer. And I was well, I don't really love math that much. And even though my siblings do, they're actually engineers. I was engineer's not for me. So I was a doctor it is. And, they wear a white coat. They're respected.
True.
Obviously, after some self-analysis, where I am today, I look back and what's the why behind it? Like, why did I want to be a doctor? And it all has to do with, I was seeking respect. I wanted to be like a respected profession, maybe what comes with it, without really knowing what they did, because I never did an internship really growing up. But not only that, but like life is just a combination of things that happen to you, and you go through that. And during college, and looking back, I think there's a quote by Steve Jobs that I loved, and I'm maybe paraphrasing and not doing the proper honor, but it's along the lines of like, life doesn't make sense looking forward. Like connecting dots makes sense looking backwards, right? In the sense of like, oh, like now I see why I love what I do and how I ended up doing what I do because of X, Y, and Z. Like, it makes a little bit more sense when you do that. Yeah. And even at work, we have this thing called like, one of our own like corporate languages is like connecting the dots. Connecting the dots means a few things, whether it's like understanding the big picture, it means connecting to the to multiple stakeholders, etc. But in my life, it's like in general, it's like, what were the pieces in my life puzzle that where I'm at today? And back in college was like, okay, like maybe organic chemistry and pre-med's not for me. Like it's not my jam, but now it's a question of what is my thing. And I met folks, met friends, and that's one thing that it's always going to be curious into whatever you do. And I ended up dating someone, I don't even think she knows this at this point, but ended up dating someone who was a business major. And some of my friends were business majors, so because I wanted to hang out with her and them, I ended up going to some business club meetings in college. And I was like, oh, well, like, what is this business thing? Like, this is something I wish I would have known about. And that's when I made a decision. The more I learned about it, the more it made sense. And it wasn't a matter of like making money. It was a matter of like, it just sounds fun. It sounds like something I want to learn about. So I made it my mission after graduation to say, hey, I'm going to do business. Like, I made the decision. I was like, I have no idea how that's going to happen. We're going to do that.
I mean, you've been in sales for a little bit. There's different versions of sales. There's new business sales. Then there's sales where, you're an account director where maybe, you just have a full, like maybe 5 or a handful of accounts. I mean, at this point now, like, where are you today in terms of like your sales journey? Like, do you just have, a handful of accounts? Do you have like a territory? I know you mentioned Utah. Like, give us a little bit of context on where you're at today. What type of sales do you do?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a progressive career, right? You start, some folks start as sales development reps, and then they do like inbound outreach or outbound outreach. My experience was a little interesting. The first job that I got in sales ended up being an account executive role. So that in itself, and that wasn't because I jumped the hoops and skipped all the different levels. It was just because the company didn't have sales development reps. It didn't have business development reps. It was like either account executive and you did your own outbound outreach and inbound outreach. So it was basically a combo role. Yeah. And you obviously work your way up from smaller accounts to bigger accounts. So first job was working that lower AE role, working with small school districts, where and then in combination with like the field rep who was working the larger like Los Angeles Unified School District, which I felt very blessed. I was actually the first one to bring one of the LA USD schools, and that's what opened up like the road for like bigger deals later. The big deal happened after I left, but like that, just putting your own work and your impact on it, because we hadn't cracked the territory, right? That helps. I mean, you get it. You're in sales, so everything helps.
Yeah, everything helps. You know what I mean? Small deals, large deals, whatever. I take it.
Exactly. So, and that was the progression of my career, was that, and then I leveraged that to go into a more, I would say, like sexier brand. I was looking for a younger company, just because while I love my first company that I worked for doing sales, I was more in a satellite office, and I was looking for a little bit more of a HQ, younger crowd experience. And being a satellite office and a sales team where most of the folks are just on the road, it was kind of lonely, especially in your 20s. I was like, well, like, I want to make some friends or want to know some people, etc. So I fit into like a younger company, and at the time I was living in Oakland. So I would say like the hot company that was local was Pandora Radio and advertising. So that was yeah. So, and that one was working with SMB, small businesses, doing advertising, sales, and all that jazz. And then through my network and folks and mentors, and that I'm extremely grateful for, and still super connected with, I discovered this role called, this role at Salesforce, which is the number one software solution at a SaaS-based organization. So.
Yes.
Yeah, so like I felt very fortunate, and I came in the AE role, worked my way through the small business, and then to growth business. Got promoted a few times to like team lead, to senior AE, to where I'm at. Is extremely blessed and fortunate, and being curious and talking to folks, and I really just try to understand like how you can improve as a seller, and just we have a few like cultural like values that we believe in. One of them is like we sell as a team, so leveraging your resources, asking for help.
Yeah.
And now I'm at this role where it's just the mid-market role, and we cover about 10 accounts or so. So larger strategic deals that have multiple motions, especially at Salesforce, we have so many products.
Yeah,
so kind of my day-to-day is very strategic, being like face-to-face with customers as much as possible.
So it's actually, I want to chime in for a second, because that's really interesting. So you were in Pandora. I mean, Pandora, great brand, like it's young, it's hip, people know it. And that was a springboard, but you springboarded from Pandora into one of the best companies on planet Earth, and probably the best software company in the world.
Doing well. I feel very grateful for it.
Yeah, I mean, that's not easy, bro. That's not normal. Okay, that's not normal. I mean, like that's not, I mean, there's a little bit of luck in everything, but that's not a normal thing, right? Like to springboard into that, and you use connections, and Pandora has a good name. So what I'm curious about is, look, you take your sales skills, and you jump in, but going from Pandora to going to Salesforce, I don't care what division of Salesforce, it's not easy. And so I'm curious to know what that experience was like. And what I mean by that is, you already had some sales experience. So you'd had, shown that you knew you could do the work, right?
Yeah.
But there are levels to this too. So when you got to Salesforce, and you had to, leverage all these different resources and it's different products and things. I mean, what was that experience like?
Yeah, I mean, it was great. I mean, it's been one of the best experiences professionally, personally, like the fact that, and not to sell you on Salesforce, but in general, like the culture is on point, and like our number one value is trust, and the second value is customer success, and then you have innovation and quality. So all of these like are actual values that so far I've seen them throughout the organization. So, and it's one of those things. It's not an easy like what do you call onboarding process by any means. It's probably that with being virtual for a lot of folks, my heart goes out to them, because it's definitely you need that social component, that being able to be on the floor and ask questions, because we do have a lot of resources, we have a lot of products, but it's also pretty hard to navigate in general, just given the complexity of it, because you have a new role, but then you also have to learn the new language. You have to figure out where to go to get help and all that, but it's doable, right? And I think that's one of the things that's like Salesforce has been doing a good job around like hiring non-traditional folks in terms of like not everyone has to be SaaS-based in order to get a job there. It's more around like figure out like what's your character, do you have competencies that they're looking for, etc. But for me, it just came down to one, like I'm an immigrant. Like I grew up in El Salvador when I was 13, and just having to figure things out. It's not new to me. Just I had to figure out like where to go, when I was in middle school, like where to go to do X, Y, and Z. Like, who do I talk to get into college? Who can help me? And the same thing goes for like career-wise, like being able to be curious and ask questions, and not feel like oh, I don't want to seem silly for asking this question. It's like, no, just ask the question if you need help. Obviously show that you have tried something, because, leadership is like, you're not going to come to your manager with problems. You got to come with solutions. So think about an issue or challenge, talk to peers, and, if you don't have what you need, then figure it out. And that means like going to whoever you need to get to get an answer. And that's important, because that's important for what we do in sales. Like if I'm looking to a customer that I see a potential for them benefiting from our solutions, like I'll do my homework and say, okay, who do I need to talk to? Be creative, connecting dots, who knows who, understand the customer. What are they trying to accomplish, right? And the same goes for like your own careers. Like no one's gonna say, hey, here you go, Javier, you are now an enterprise rep or VP now. Now you kind of have to raise your hand, show that you're doing the work, and obviously be your own champion and have folks and sponsors throughout your journey. To me, that's been critical. And it goes back to what I believe in, which is helping others. And like, I feel fortunate because having been laid off, and that's when I realized the power of relationships. I don't like to call it networking. Networking has a negative connotation because people kind of just gave it a bad connotation. But the way I look at networking or just relationship building is like, how can I help so-and-so? And that just comes back to you tenfold. And not from the perspective like, I'm going to help because I know it's going to come tenfold, because then it loses its meaning and then it doesn't come tenfold because there's a hidden agenda. So like, be authentic about it. Like, like that's what we talk to our customers. Like, how can I help? And that's pretty the way I kind of drive my career.
It's interesting what you mentioned before. Now, I really like it because, look, when you're faced with challenges, when you get a job and maybe you don't know if you're qualified or you are qualified, but to get acclimated to the organization is really tough. I mean, in one of my last companies, when I was at Admiral, they were doing programmatic advertising and it was super technical. And I had a little bit of a technical background. But like when I got there, I mean, these, the people there, the grade of people, how smart they were, how much they understood, how much knowledge they had, how much experience, how they spoke to customers. It was just levels above. I mean, it was just, and I think, I felt a little out of place to some degree because you got to really step your game up. And I thought I was decent, but you have to, there's a difference between an all-star and like an elite player or a box office player. And what I really like about what you honed in on, you talked a little bit about how curiosity has to drive a lot of what you're doing. And then you talk a lot about asking questions and doing your homework. And really what that sounds like, it's just being thorough. And so I think really some of the advice around whether you're approaching your clients, whether it's approaching a new job, whether it's approaching trying to get a new role is, listen, man, not only take your curiosity there, but you also have to do the work, have to be thorough, ask questions, and come to the table showing, I love what you showed, which is showing that you did the work. So like, hey man, look, I checked this piece of collateral. I talked to this person, I don't know what's next. Help me, right? That, I think people forget that. People forget the importance of that. They just go to somebody, hey, can you just tell me the answer? And I'm lazy. And I really do like that. I like how you spell that out. I really do. It's cool.
I agree with you on that. And that's, that's very, I feel like that's common, right, to hear across many folks. And I think it has to do with like how you grew up as well, right? If everything has been given to you, then there's maybe this like assumption that everything should be easy in life. And life is not supposed to be easy. Life is just life.
Life is just life.
Like, with good things, bad things, you give it meaning at the end of the day, right?
So I think, it's interesting though, too, because, when you have some success, sometimes salespeople can get complacent and, and when you get complacent, then we all know bad things kind of happen. And so I am curious to know, within your experience, I mean, what are some of the qualities that you would say make a good salesperson, like just in your perspective?
Yeah. I think there wouldn't certainly be a difference between good salesperson is just being a good person in general, the way I look at it, because there's this connotation when people think about sales, right? That's what I used to think before I even got into sales, until I finally realized, no, there are really good companies out there where your product adds value and you want to work for those companies, right? Because you believe in them and they're making a positive impact. So in return, you're helping someone improve something, whatever that means. And so the same applies for, what it means to be a good person. I think there's 3 pieces, and I thought about this. I've thought about this before. It's like, one, like, be curious. Really ask yourself and not just pretend to, like, for example, you're with a customer and they're telling you something, like, be actively listening and be actually curious, not just pretend to be curious. Don't listen to respond and don't hear, but actually actively listen to figure out, like, what are some ways you can help in general, but just listen to the challenges. So be curious. The second one, be yourself, and the third one, be kind. Which some people may see that as, well, that doesn't sound like a good salesperson. Be kind, like, oh, shouldn't you be strong? Not really. I'm not saying, doesn't mean just being kind doesn't mean you're not self-aware and not a leader. That doesn't mean that, right? So being curious to actively listen to the customer and find what's challenging, which applies to life in general. Just ask, your partner or girlfriend or boyfriend, if you're not actively curious and actually care to listen to, I'm sure it doesn't work out that well. So the second aspect, right, is like, be yourself. Like, there's an awesome quote by Oscar Wilde that I truly love, and it's around, just be yourself. Everyone else is already taken. So
let me ask you something about that, though, because I found that I wasn't actually able to be myself exactly. Of course you have to be professional, of course, but I found oftentimes, it was only recently, just a few years ago, like, once I had enough years under my belt where I felt like I can actually take my authentic self to work. I was always kind of myself, but, and so I wonder, like, when you say be yourself and what have you, what exactly do you mean by that?
That's such a good point, right? Because now the question is around, so let me know if make sure I'm hearing it right. It sounds like, being your authentic self, what does that mean? But 2, how does being your authentic self impact your relationships at work?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
You bring a different self. So many different complexities to that question. I feel like some thoughts that come to mind is, like, 1, like, finding who you are, first of all, right? And 2, like, imposter syndrome being a challenge, especially as a man of color, and where I came from, and so many ideas. And I guess I could tackle, like, the imposter syndrome one. I think it's interesting. I was just listening to this fascinating interview by Jay-Z. And there was also an interview, and this is like a long time ago, him and Warren Buffett chatting. And then I did a follow-up interview with just him, his perspective on life. And I went down the YouTube rabbit hole, as you can see. And it's interesting because here's a guy, right, who's extremely musically talented, was in the right places, therefore he was, get into trouble, but his musical talent saved him out of that, and now he's I think he's a billionaire.
Yeah.
Billionaire, there you go. He's a billionaire.
Crazy.
And they're asking a question, and they say, hey, when you walk into the room, say a boardroom or a business meeting, like, do you ever feel like dumb? Do you ever feel different just because of X, Y, and Z? You have these folks that around you have like these fancy degrees. He was like, no. And I'm paraphrasing here. It's like, no, they may have their degrees, but I have life experiences, and that's important. And I am who I am, regardless of where I walk. Yeah. And there's this level of confidence to him. Obviously, his success is, it's obvious that he's a successful individual, but he was just saying that his who he is at the core, trust and just being a man of honor of his word and just put in the hard work and focus. That's the reason why he's been able to be not just a one-time hit wonder, but rather multiple hits, multiple business streams, and multiple engagements that he's done because of his focus and who he is at the core. Which then goes back to imposter syndrome. And that's not to say I definitely have experienced it before. That's normal, especially if you're in a different setting. Then it just has to do with, are you acclimated to a new environment, et cetera? It's adaptation to a certain extent. I definitely feel comfortable in any setting now. It just depends on if it's a new experience. If it's different experience, then that's going to take practice, right? And I mean, you can say, like, for me, it was just coming down to figure out who I was. And I think, not to say anything about like age, but I feel like now that once I hit my 30s, I realized I was like, this is who I am. And like, one, I have to figure out what are my core values. And thanks to COVID definitely taught me that. To become words and figure out what is it that I wanted to do and who I was. So like, I find out what my values were, what are my priorities, and just like building positive habits have helped me a lot, and have clarity as to like, what is it that I want to do in my life? And obviously being open to change is important. That has really helped with imposter syndrome or feeling out of place, because if I ever feel, if I'm in a room and maybe I don't feel comfortable, it has to do mostly because I'm not present. Because if you're grounded and present, know who you are and remember who you are in those types of scenarios, then those feelings of being odd or off they dissipate, because a lot of those thoughts, and this is just me, like I'm a huge fan of stoicism, and like I meditate, just like overall balance, and it has to do with, for me, it's about being present. So whether that's camera, right, or if I'm in a meeting, if I think people think a certain whatever that is, then that means I'm not being present. And a lot of the times, so many of us humans are so selfish that everyone's just thinking of themselves, right? And once you take that macro out of the equation, all right, you know what? Just at the end of the day, we're all humans, and we all have our own challenges and biases.
I think, it's very fascinating too, because I think also what you're bringing up is the point of like, as we mature, as we learn and to understand like what our values are, and we lean into, really lean into feeling like a lot more comfortable with ourselves. And that helps with having some success too, right? When you have some trials and errors and then you say, I kind of understand how this life thing works out. I think it's a little bit easier to be yourself a little bit more. And I think then from there, when you realize, hey, being curious, being your authentic self, actively listening, which are probably values that you take personally, are now being associated to like your work. And then you have this merging that happens, right? And then that's when the magic happens. Because as you were describing it, like now I'm like super transparent with my clients. You know what I mean? Like I had a client where I told them, I was like, look, I don't think you should do it. I'll do it if you want to do it, but I don't think you should do it. You know what I mean? I tell them, look,
that's stress, right?
And since I've been doing that, people appreciate it. They appreciate when you're just like, look, when I approach my clients, I typically try to do probably something very similar to, you talk about all the active listening, so on and so forth. But I usually just try to kind of lay out the options that they're going to evaluate anyway. You know what I mean? Give them the pros and the cons. And then I just, I really keep it 100 with them. And, my clients, I'm really grateful for them. And I feel as though it's only over time, though, when you can merge, your personal self with the work, that I think really good things can kind of happen.
You brought an interesting point too in that context, by the way. Thanks for sharing that. And it's so important, like where it's trust. It's not about a deal. It's like like understanding what the values are, customer success or whatever it may be in that specific scenario. But you brought an interesting point around how success can, in a way, give you that confidence of who you are, and you can be yourself a little bit longer. What's your take on like the other side of it, right? Like, yes, success is great. Sorry, my screen is going off here. Success is great, but what happens when you hit failure? Do you feel like on your side you learn the most versus like the wins?
It's kind of interesting, because when I think about failure and when I think about success, I learned from both. So a few years ago, I think it was maybe 2018, 2019, I took the foot off of the gas in terms of like prospecting, and I paid for that. And, when you're not prospecting, when you don't prospect, you feel the negativity of that months later. And so, I learned from that because then obviously I didn't do as well as I wanted to. But on the flip side, like this year, I'm doing pretty well because I have some long contracts that I was able to sign. So, I learned from both and I try to lean into both, but definitely I feel the negative ones. Like I carry that one, those much longer. I'm much more sensitive to those. I'm just like, I still feel those,
Yeah.
How about yourself though? I mean, do you feel the negative ones more, or how do you how do you deal with, does positive lean into you a little bit more, or do you feel the negative a little bit more?
I mean, as any human, we would love to not feel any failures or any growth areas, but at the end of the day, like that's how you grow anyway. So it's a nice to have a balance of both. One to the challenges to help you grow and also keep you real. One of the I think at this point I've been in sales close to 7+ years or 8 years now. And one of the early lessons that I got from one of my mentors was just to stay consistent, like your emotional consistency. Don't let the big wins like get to your head, and obviously stay by yourself first. That was one of the lessons I learned early on. And for me, I like to have a balance of both, but I definitely learn a lot from my challenges or growth areas, I would say.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily call them failures just because there's always something that comes out of it, right? There's always a win, even of a challenge that you may be facing or not hitting your number. Like you learn something from that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I did have some questions like before as we kind of like go to the back half of the podcast today, which was, what would you say to somebody who has that's interested in maybe sales, or, they've been in sales for a few years? I mean, what are some of the types of advice that you would give to a salesperson that's struggling or just trying to get over that hump, the early year hump?
I would say ask yourself why. Why do I be in sales for one? And I hear there's a lot in software sales mostly, right? A lot of folks are like, well, I want to get into tech. And I feel fortunate landing tech. It was never my intention to land in tech. Mm-hmm. But a lot of folks come with this idea of, is it money driven? There's many ways of making money, legal ways of making money.
Yeah.
Right. And is it because you love tech, or is it a company? Is there a specific company? And I asked this question to especially folks that want to join Salesforce, or maybe I'm having an intro, or they're getting ready for an interview. So I'm kind of asking them, ask yourself why. Really, really ask yourself why. Because say you get the job, if you don't have a strong why, it's just like anything in life, call it fitness. If you don't have a strong why, you're not going to keep up with it, right? How are you going to keep up with it? So that's. What are your thoughts on that, Jamie? It sounds like that's something you agree with.
Yeah. I mean, well, listen, here's the thing, I mean, especially in our industry, I mean, new business sales, whether it's fitness and health, whether it's, running, meditation, listen, if you don't have a very strong why, you're not going to really stick with it. And so, I mean, for me, my whys have evolved over time. At first it was to pay off school debt. Then it was, to provide the lifestyle that I want, but it's, to have the flexibility, so on and so forth. So I've always thought having a why, a very deep why is important. But I've also recognized that changes over time. What I cared about at 21 is not going to be the same at 31, right? So I do try to be mindful of that. But more importantly, recently, I have found that a lot of the choices that I make have to be aligned with what I care about. It has to feed the mind, the body, the soul. And if those things are not integrated, it's increasingly difficult for me to care about it.
Yeah. If one thing's off, right, typically it impacts everything else like a cascade of.
It is, exactly. So that was part of the reason why I started the podcast. I mean, I paid off a few things. I have a little bit more mental real estate to try. I want to give back, as you mentioned, you're doing the same. And so, if I didn't have a strong why, if it wasn't integrated with my life, I would have given up on this already. It costs a lot of money. It costs a lot of time. You know what I mean? It's a lot. So a lot of those things that I do, they just have to matter to me, and I'm grateful though, man. I'm grateful that, we're having the opportunity to have these kind of conversations and hopefully give back to others,
Yeah, and you brought a great point, right? In that statement, you're like your whys may change, and that's true, right? Your why today may be different, at the age of 30 versus at the age of 40. But having at least having clarity on like what is your why first of all, and how does that align with the bigger picture of your values? Then that's going to drive the actions, whatever that may be, right? For you, it's like starting a podcast. Like for me, one of the things that I asked myself was also like, what is it that I want to do? And I started like very similar to you, like a creative outlet. So growing up, my parents sent me to art camp. So I used to grow up drawing, and I used to video. So now I ended up launching like a YouTube channel. So doing that, just because of back to you, right? Just try to find what is the meaning of it, and does it align with your values? And then obviously like making a strong why. And then making an investment, right? Making an investment to the point you're like, well, now I have to do it. Being thoughtful about like, I think it's all about like habit building, right? It's like, okay, like when you wake up early to go to the gym, like what's your why? And then you do certain actions that help you encourage to do that. So
yeah, everything kind of your entire choices, your lifestyle, the food you eat, everything has to go. All right, man, that's cool, man. I like that. I like that theme. Like that's something I like, this integrated theme where everything is like kind of comes together. I really enjoy that, man. I'm actually going to steal that from you. Like I like that.
And what's that? There's this book that I really like recently. You may like it's by Jay Shetty, Think Like a Monk, and he does a good job of like bringing everything together around like business mindset, life advice with this kind of meditation approach. It's not religious anyway, but it's more mindfulness, very integrated. Back to your point. So just
love it. Actually, well, that it's funny because that was actually a question I was going to ask, which is a good time to transition to the last section of the podcast today. So that's actually a perfect transition. So the last section of the podcast is called Power Questions. It's really it's rapid fire, just 5 questions that's designed to give the audience a little bit of understanding as to who Javier is and kind of like your lifestyle, right? So here's the deal. You're not supposed to think about the questions too much. It's more like kind of a rapid fire clash. You can elaborate on it, but trying to be as authentic to your point as possible. All right, you ready?
Got it. All right,
cool. So numero uno, how many hours of sleep do you get?
6.5.
Okay. What's your diet like right now?
Right now it's about, I've been trying to do the math. It's a very macro focus. So it's about, I believe I'm at 270 grams of carbs, 35 grams of fat, and 250 protein. I can't remember.
250 protein?
Point being, so I'm going to cut. So I've been cutting for the past 5 weeks. And so, you know me, Damien, so I'm very strict about like looking at the factors of it. So I look at like decreasing my carbs or fats or protein, depending on like what week I'm on, and like balancing that out with my cardio output and like workout. Like right now, my workout regimen is I work out twice a day, about 5-6 times a week, 6 times a week. Like cardio at night or in the morning or vice versa, and then lifting. So feeding, proper fuel, it's important if I'm going to do that.
I believe. Well, all right. This is perfect then. So what drives you?
What drives me? I would say like just progress. So like having projects of some kind. So like there's this awesome quote by, I'm forgetting his name. I'm blanking on this, but progress is happiness. So
Tim Robbins, I think.
Yes, that is correct. You got it right. And it's true. There's been periods in my life where I feel like I'm burnt out. It's typically because I'm not working towards a specific goal, whether that's like, so I typically have goals around very similar to you, where you have like mind, body, soul. Mine's around like 4 different pillars, like physical wellness, emotional wellness, relationships, and all that jazz. So like I have to do a project within that. So like, for me, it's a creative outlet. So like launching a YouTube channel, and that's like the creative piece. Like emotional wellness is like, I have calls with my parents every week with my family. We do this family call. And then I have like a fitness goal. So right now I'm getting ready for a shoot that I'm doing in 2 weeks. So awesome. I've been working towards that for the past 5-6 weeks, and just seeing the progress, it's really what keeps me going.
Yeah, I love that, man. I love that. We have to have another conversation about that offline, actually.
Happy to.
Yeah, and the last thing is, so what are you reading or listening to besides Think Like a Monk?
Yeah. As you may have heard, whoever's on the audience is that I'm a very process-driven guy, and I do the same thing for my books. So there's something about like physical paper that I love. So I have a variety of that. So I have like I do morning. So I'm pretty wild when it comes to my morning routine. So I typically wake up around 3:30 or 4 in the morning, and I do meditation. I do my pre-workout, and I do some reading in the morning. And the reading in the morning is typically paper books. So I just got the Motivation Manifesto. Thanks to you, Damien, for the recommendation.
All right. Yeah, it's great, right?
That's my morning read. So I got it on paper. And so it's great, man. It's fantastic. And I also do the Daily Stoic because it's a very short, like quick read. I have that on Kindle. So I do that in the morning. And then when I go on my cardio evening walks, I just do a podcast, and that's when I do Jay Shetty's book. I like to rotate him as well. So like also got Ron Holiday mixed in. He just got a new book, Courage is Calling. Huge fan of Stoicism, and I've read all of his books. So I switch between him and Jay Shetty's right now for my walks.
Nice, man. Like, you got a full plate right over there, bro. That's a lot. All right, cool, man. Well, listen, Javier, this conversation was so dope, man. I'm so pleased and thankful that you carved out some time of your busy schedule to be able to jump on the podcast. I really love the conversation, man. Like, I hope you swing by. Question: if somebody, actually, two questions. Number one, when is your channel? When is your podcast? When is your channel coming out? And if somebody wants to reach you or connect with you, what would be the best way?
Absolutely. So, hey, channel should be out by the time this podcast comes out. I'm going on a 5-week content creation trip in the next few days. So I'm excited to do that. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook under Xavier Kark. We're going to put the link somewhere in the description.
Yes,
and
we will.
XavyCarc. And that is because my grandpa used to call me that growing up. So that's how I went with that name. And so you can reach me on that. So I'm very reachable on any of those platform and channels.
Cool, brother. Well, thanks a lot, man. Really appreciate it. This conversation was awesome, man. Thank you so much for the time.
Hey, thank you for your time and for the platform. Had a fantastic time, so appreciate it.
Cool, man. So it was good, fam. Hopefully you enjoyed Javier's episode. I really enjoyed it. I had a good time chatting with him. So there was a few things that Javier brought to the table that I wanted to put on the radar that I thought were particularly important. Now, I got to warn you that these, the things that I thought that he mentioned that are really important, like they're different types of cheat codes. Sometimes some are tactical, some are strategic, some are just straight up different. And I thought his were a merging of different as well as some tactical. So numero uno. The first thing is the importance of actively listening. Actively listening for a salesperson, or just in general for a person who exists, who cares about other people, is very important. So if you don't really know about actively listening, I do encourage you to Google it. But the idea is you're actually paying attention to someone says. You're not doing leading questions. You're really breaking down and processing what they say. But at the same time of doing that, you're also trying to better understand if you can share something of value to them. Actively listening means that you're essentially taking in all of their information, processing it, and trying to then better make sense of it, and then confirming if you understand what they say or you understand basically the point that the person you're talking to is trying to convey. The other things, and this is on the unique side, and I was actually surprised because you don't really hear salespeople talk like this, but he brought up some really good points, is the importance of being curious, which I am a huge proponent of. I'm a naturally curious person, but genuinely wanting to understand and be curious is something that's very, very important, because that curiosity will help you to gain information. You can demonstrate how you care through curiosity and questions. And then a couple other things he mentioned was, the importance of being authentic or being yourself. Nothing's wrong with being professional. Nothing's wrong with being organized or buttoned up. Nothing's wrong with being prepared. But I think at this point too, we're in the day and age where people want to see a little bit of someone's, true nature. And so bringing a lot of yourself to the table, whether it's the types of jokes that you make, even though of course they have to be in good taste, smiling, bringing things to the table, just, humanizing the process is important. So I really enjoyed part of Javier's podcast just because of, him stressing the importance of being authentic and being yourself. That's just in this day and age, I think that is so important. You want to, no one's saying to be inauthentic, don't be fake, but bring things to the table and reveal a little bit of yourself during the sales process. That's important. And I think the reality is regardless of whether you're in sales or not, that's something that when you bring humanity, to the table, I think it can be very powerful. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the episode. Please subscribe for more. Obviously we're on YouTube and Spotify and all that good stuff. So until the next time, take care.